Attention! This makes absolutely no sense. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Zander's Facts.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the latest edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. I am, of course, the aforementioned Zander. It is episode 94 of the podcast here on Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. Thank you all so much for listening, for pressing the button that sent this podcast straight into your ears. It's a big podcast this week because we have our Zander's Facts NBA analyst, Hillbilly. He is joining the podcast once again to update us on the NBA season. Because I don't know if you saw or not, but on Sunday there was a big football game. Turns out that a certain team from Kansas City won, as someone on this podcast, I believe, last week told you was going to happen.
Zander warned you.
Just saying. Might want to go listen back to that podcast if you haven't. Just if you don't believe me. That was episode 93 this week, but episode 94 is this week. We are talking about the NBA because football's over, and why would you watch the spring football leagues when you could watch basketball? We are talking about professional basketball this week, the NBA. The All-Star weekend is this weekend, the All-Star game. The trade deadline was last week, and oh boy, I don't think the NFL liked last week when the NBA was taking all of their thunder during Super Bowl week, because the NBA had a ton of big-time headlines popping out, including LeBron James becoming the all-time leading scorer. We're going to talk about all that with Hillbilly in just a second here on the podcast, so make sure to keep listening, but also make sure that if you like the facts, if you think you're going to like all the facts on this week's edition, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode, episode 94, rate and review the podcast, then check us out on all our socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm on them all, at Zander's Facts. That is Zander with a Z, and most importantly, remember to tell all your friends, spread the facts! Zander's Facts Podcast. Tell all your friends about the podcast, about Zander's Weekend Facts, our weekly newsletter, which has the week's top headlines summarized for you. It's convenient. It is free. Sign up in the episode subscription. Check out the Zander's Facts link tree because it has all the Zander's Facts links that you need, including for Zander's Facts website, zandersfacts.com, which has the Zander's Facts shop. Get your facts swag at zandersfacts.com. So, with that out of the way, let's get straight to it. I want to get straight to it because we have a lot of facts to cover with Hillbilly. He brought the facts this week as we update the NBA season. We're in the home stretch, 2 months away from the playoffs. The basketball is getting good. So, if you haven't been watching basketball because football's on, now is the time to start watching basketball. And we've got a little update for you here on the podcast about everything professional basketball. Let's get to it. Our NBA season update with our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst Hillbilly as the Zander's Facts podcast continues.
Zander's Facts.
All right, so I've been seeing a lot of stuff on social media about all these NBA basketball podcasts, and people are complaining that those people don't even watch the NBA. They have no clue what they're talking about. Well, I can assure you that that is not the case on this podcast, because whenever we talk about the NBA, you all know, we bring on our senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly, who watches all the games every day. He is a true NBA fan.
Spitting the truth.
Hillbilly is back on the podcast this week to provide an NBA season update. Hillbilly, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. I feel a little pressured now. I didn't know I was supposed to be watching the games.
Well, that's kind of a prerequisite for being a senior NBA analyst. But
I guess so. Nope, I haven't. It's been a lot of fun watching so far. You know, we're getting into the home stretch, kind of past the 2/3 point, and things are starting to take shape, and it looks like it's going to be really fun going into the postseason.
Well, we are. We've had a lot of news recently. I mean, the trade deadline just happened last week. It was one of the most eventful trade deadlines we've had in quite some time. The All-Star break is this weekend, so it's we're at a nice point to basically recap everything that's gone on so far. But as Hillbilly said, we're about to get into the home stretch and gear up for the playoffs. Football's over, so we got to update you with some basketball facts, and that is what we are going to do this week. As I said, trade deadline happened last week. The NFL was probably not very happy with the NBA last week because everybody was talking about all the trades that went down in the NBA, which we're going to talk about. Hillbilly has been gracious enough to bless us with his top 8 teams, contenders for the NBA championship this year. So we are going to run down that list, talk about all the trades they've made, how they're looking, what their chances are of winning the championship.
Get ready.
All right, so why don't we just get straight into that list, Hillbilly, because you've got your top 8 teams who have a chance, and that's the teams that a lot of people who haven't been watching basketball because they've been watching football want to know about, who's going to win the championship. So you've got your top 8 teams. Why don't we run down this list and start out with your number 8 team?
Well, at number 8, I have the Clippers. I think that loyal listeners will remember that I picked the Clippers to represent the West in the finals, but things just kind of haven't progressed, and it's gotten to the point where, due to the amount of talent that they have, you can't just write them off. If Kawhi is just holding everything in reserve and he can still bring it in the playoffs, who knows? But I don't think they made themselves much better at the trade deadline, and I don't think they got better at the spots they really needed to. So they picked up Mason Plumlee, who's a backup center, one of the, I don't know how many Plumlees have played in the NBA. I think it's at least 5 or 6. Well, where did they all go to school? Was it Duke?
Yeah, they go to Duke. Well, there's Mason, there's
Marshall.
Marshall,
Miles.
Of course.
Who?
There's at least 3. But anyways, a decent backup center, which will help with the Zubac moments to kind of give him some rest. Eric Gordon, they brought over, who is not quite the big deal that he used to be, but, the guy can still shoot. He can still provide some good offense for him. And then they picked up Bones Highland, that was kind of a fire sale from Denver because he was going nuclear in Denver and had to go. They got him for next to nothing, but what they really needed was a point guard. And, instead they get rid of Reggie Jackson, who they had been playing at point guard. And also Luke Kennard went out.
And John Wall.
But, John Wall was it just really wasn't providing much. So now it's like, I don't know if they're planning on relying on Bones Highland because they really don't have a lot of other people that are just playing point guards on that team. And that would be a disaster. That guy's shooting under 40%. He's had a blow up in Denver with the coach that there's no way he could stay. And it's because he doesn't do anything but try to shoot and score. And he's okay at it. But I just don't think that the Clippers made the move they needed, which was to get a good playmaking facilitator in there, a point guard, to kind of set the table for Paul George and Kawhi to just make things easier on them, to try to grind out baskets in the playoffs. And I don't think they did that. I don't think they've come along like we hoped they would. Like we've seen them start to gel. As I said, I think we're over the 2/3 mark, maybe even at the 3/4 mark. Teams have got to start getting it together now. And they just don't really ever seem to do it. But like I said, I don't think you can count out a team with Kawhi and Paul George on it.
So we talk about the Clippers. They have played 59 games this year. They're 31-28 in those, 6th in the West, a loaded Western Conference, which we're obviously going to talk about. But you've got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, both of whom have over 22 points a game. How far do you think this team could go with, those 2 guys? And obviously we haven't seen Kawhi Leonard play very much in LA.
Well, I don't know how far they really can go. I don't think they're going to progress much. And where they're standing right now, so they'd have the Kings right now, which you would think that a playoff experienced team like the Clippers would be able to take advantage of the Kings, lack of experience and then not really having much defensive metal to them. But whichever one they draw, I think the Clippers are going to have some problems. I just, unless they surprise everybody and they get it back together and Kawhi is just really holding it in reserve, I just don't see him making it out of the first round.
Whoops.
I don't know I haven't seen your list previously, so you all are listening to this for the first time with me, but I don't know if the Kings are on your list, but we got to talk about the Kings at some point. They are 3rd in the West.
Well, I'll tell you right now, though, the Kings aren't on the list. And, the reason they're not on it, despite where they are right now, is it's just, this is a list of, it's hard to come up with these lists in a way that makes any sense because the things you're trying to predict.
These are not Zander's facts.
Do you do the list considering injury or not, just assuming health for everybody? And is that really fair given that, Phoenix may be much better if you assume health?
The Kings are 1st in the NBA in points per game. They're averaging almost 120 points per game. They're second in offensive rating. Their offensive rating is first in the league in the games they've won. That's 31 games. And a little fact I got for you. De'Aaron Fox, who's done really well for that team this year, scored 14 points in a single overtime period like last week or so, which is the most by a player in overtime this season.
It's a fact.
Yeah, well, they've got a lot of good offensive firepower on the team. They seem to enjoy playing together. Things seem to be clicking. But, we're talking about a list of people and their likelihood to win the championship. And the teams that are off that list for me are the teams that I would be surprised if they won the championship. It would be a genuine surprise. Teams that are as young as the Kings with zero playoff experience on almost all of their players don't win the finals ever, pretty much. And they're not, whatever exceptions there have been, the Kings aren't that exceptional of a team. So I just wouldn't consider them to be a contender to win the title.
All right, well, I got one more fact for you on the Kings before we move on. So the Kings played the Rockets 4 times this year. They swept the Rockets in all 4 of those matchups. They scored over 130 points in each game of those 4 games. That's just the 3rd time that's happened in the history of the NBA. How about that?
It's all true.
So let's go to your number 7 team, Hillbilly. Who was it?
At number 7, I've got the Grizzlies. And I thought I would have them higher than this at this point in the year. They seem to really be chugging along earlier. But Steven Adams going out was huge for them. Their record has just gone right in the tank. And the fact that he's that important to his team or to the team is a little troubling because Steven Adams is the kind of player that can have trouble staying on the court in the playoffs. Someone that is that offensively limited, they can get played off the court to where, previously teams didn't necessarily play him a lot at the end of games, in playoffs just because of his, offensive liabilities. And so the fact that they're that reliant on him, they've just seemed different since he's been out. And then the stuff keeps happening with Ja Morant that I hate to say where there's smoke, there's fire, but he at least seems to be keeping poor company and just maybe making some bad decisions. And that stuff can just kind of drag on you. I'm just not getting the best feeling about the Grizzlies right now. But they're also so loaded with talent that it really wouldn't be a surprise if they did put it together and made a big run. I'm worried Ja Morant might be a little distracted.
Yeah, you talk about the stuff with Ja Morant. Apparently, a couple weeks ago or so, there was a red laser that was pointed by his entourage, I guess, at Pacers personnel. His father has gotten into several confrontations during games, courtside, while they're playing the games with opposing teams and other fans.
Fight me.
But you're talking about a team that's 34-21 in the West. They are second in the West, but they have lost 7 of their last 10. But they're second in rebounds and blocks per game. Ja Morant's 5th in assists, and the only really trade they made was getting Luke Kennard from the Clippers.
Yeah, and Luke Kennard again is the kind of guy I don't know that he's really going to help them when they really need him, because they got him because their shooting can be a little hit and miss. Ja Morant's, as great as he is not a very good outside shooter. Desmond Bane is of course one of the best in the league, but they got Kennard to kind of balance that out and have 2 really good shooters to keep the defenses honest. But Kennard can't really play defense very well, and he doesn't give you anything else other than the 3. It's unlikely that he's going to give them big minutes in a really hard playoff contest that they're going to need. So I don't know that they've made a lot of big changes, but they do. Like Jaren Jackson is so good defensively. He makes up for a lot of the problems that Memphis has in their perimeter defense, because neither Ja Morant nor Desmond Bane, and if they play Luke Kennard, he's no better. None of them are playing great perimeter defense. Dylan Brooks is good, but you never know when he's going to get ejected from a game for going crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that little thing he had with Donovan Mitchell. What was it, a couple weeks ago?
Right. Well, and just he's the kind of guy that 29 teams hate him.
Disrespectful.
There's only one group of players that likes playing with him, and that's his teammates.
So for all that, the Grizzlies still sit in second in the West. But how about your number 6 team?
So at number 6, I've got the Sixers. And, the Sixers certainly have the talent to go all the way. I don't think it would surprise anybody. Embiid is if not the best player on the planet. No one's clearly better than him.
Really?
They've just loaded with talent from top to bottom. I thought they had a good trade deadline. They lost Matisse Thybulle, but they had kind of lost patience with him already. Matisse Thybulle came in as a defensive specialist, and he never really progressed with his offensive game. As I've said before, you've really got to be a two-way player, at least to some extent, to just keep defenses honest out there. And Thybulle gives you nothing on offense. So they switched him up for Jalen McDaniels is essentially what happened. And Jalen McDaniels is kind of a younger, rangier. He's got a little bit more offensive game to him. And I think they're just hoping that that's going to help round out their depth. The problem with the Sixers is just trusting them. Whether you consider health or not when you do these rankings, it's so big with someone like Embiid and Harden. They're never any good by the end of the year, or at least they're not at their peak at the end of the year. It's so rare for them for that to happen. And you just can't count on it. And I wouldn't. And they also, if you watch the Sixers, some of the games they lose, they go into these lulls where they just don't look focused. And, that's been the case for teams led by Embiid for a long time now. I mean, Embiid is obviously a just supernatural almost player. He is so good. But, it seems like there's been a leadership void in Philly for years now. And, he's clearly the best player. He needs to just really get that team together, get them focused. But for whatever reason, I don't expect it, but I wouldn't really be shocked if they were.
So the Sixers are third in the East right now. 36-19 is their record. But you talked about what happens when Philly just stops and they lose. They have blown 2 20-point leads in the last 2 weeks.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the year, we were talking about Doc Rivers, I think, and, is he really the problem? And maybe he should go. But, I mean, he's held on so far, but what do you think, Hillbilly? What's really the issue with the 76ers not being up there with the other two teams we're going to talk about in the East?
I think it's really hard to know unless you're in that locker room, I guess. I mean, exactly what the issue is, but there just seems to be some kind of lack of focus that has been part of that team for so long. Part of me wonders, almost superstitiously, if this is what happens when you tank for what was it, 5 or 6 years in a row? When you just intentionally suck for that long, I just think there's some bad karma that comes out of that. Or it's just that their collection of people and again, starting with Embiid, I mean, he is the best player on that team. I mean, is he really making his teammates get focused? That was one of the reasons that was one of the things that made Jordan so great. And, one of the very best is his teammates had to be focused. He was going to make them do it. And Antetokounmpo is the same way. You're going to be focused if you play for the Bucks. It's just going to happen. I don't really see that with Embiid, and I just don't know that he's going to be able to lead them to a championship until he gets that kind of mentality. But again, he's so talented. James Harden is still a very good player. They're rounded out throughout their roster with good players. It wouldn't be shocking if they won. I just wouldn't expect them.
Embiid is second in the league right now with 33 points per game. All right, let's go to number 5.
So at number 5, I have the Warriors. And I actually, as I'm doing this, I'm wondering if that's too high.
That's blasphemous.
I just, I said this last time our last podcast. I just have a bad feeling about Curry's health this year. And he's been out for extended periods twice now. If he's not 100% in the playoffs, you can forget it. And, they made this move for Gary Payton, who, they could have just re-signed Gary Payton last year. Now they're giving up James Wiseman, the number 2 pick in the draft, 3 years ago?
That was a fact.
Number 2 pick. They're giving him up for, a 30-year-old journeyman in the NBA. I mean, Gary Payton's good, but he's not second pick in the draft good. So that's a kind of a sad statement by the Warriors. And, now it looks like Gary Payton's not even going to be able to play much this year. Mm-hmm. So you just, and again, there are a lot of, and we talked about this before, but there are a lot of troubling signs with the Warriors and their defense, their lack of focus. But then again, they are the Warriors. If Curry is healthy and Klay Thompson looks fine these days, I think at this point we know he's never really going to be fully back to the way that he was night after night. Yeah, they've still got it. Wiggins is on his way back. Actually, he may already be back, but he's playing well. If he's at his level like he was last year, where he was the second best player on their team, they can beat anybody in a series. I just don't think that they're going to be able to string 4 playoff series in a row with what they've got going on this year and the lack of focus. So, that's why I have them down at 5.
The defending champions. I mean, you're talking about a team, number 5, who is 9th in the West, exactly 500 at 28-28, but they are still second in the league in points per game. They're averaging 118 points per game. The issue, of course, is that they're also giving up 118 points per game. And Curry has obviously been injured. He's been injured twice now, I think, because he's not going to be able to play in the All-Star game.
Right. And they've been his MVP campaign's pretty much over. He's just missed too much time. And I don't know, guys his age, with the mileage that he has on him from those long playoff runs, you need to start to worry a little bit, which sucks because he's about the most fun player to watch.
It's hard to believe he's 34.
It's the truth.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't really look it either.
Yeah. And this is better than the Warriors have. They were out of the play-in earlier this year. And it wasn't just they had played a few games. It was a lot of games that they were still out of the play-in. So it hasn't been that great of a year.
No.
Let's go to number 4 on Hillbilly's list of contenders.
So at number 4, I have the Phoenix Suns. And, the Suns they illustrate the issue when you're looking at rankings of considering health. Because if I just assumed health and assumed that they are all going to be in peak form on that team, I think they're actually the number 1 team in the NBA. I mean, Devin Booker with Kevin Durant now, and assuming Chris Paul is healthy and feeling good in the playoffs, that just by itself is incredible. And then you add in DeAndre Ayton. They are, they're not a deep team now. Although, what's the guy's name from Orlando? It looks like he's going to come over. Terrence Ross, who's actually a really good player for Orlando. He's going to come out in the buyout, which is going to help their depth a little bit. But, I don't know how in the world a defense handles Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on opposite sides with Chris Paul setting the table for him. And then DeAndre Ayton doing everything that he can do in the middle. It's just too much. But assuming health for them, I mean, what are the odds? You look at those players, between, with Kevin Durant, the way that he is now, he's still injured. And that is an injury that he's had at least once, I think twice before, that like right knee sprain or whatever. And, they were making the point that each time he's had it, he's come back and played fine. But how many times can you really count on that happening? I mean, each time that thing gets hurt, to assume that he's going to be able to bounce right back is just, you can't always assume that. He's been getting hurt a lot, unfortunately, over the last few years. I think it's hard to just assume that he's going to be there. And then Chris Paul, I think it's unlikely that he's going to be in that kind of shape. I mean, he's never really made it through an entire playoffs without getting hurt. I mean, even when he made it, in the Bucks series where they went to the finals, Chris Paul was still showing the mileage at the end there. In the last few years, last year, as we said on the podcast, when they got demolished by the Mavericks by 50 points, it was Chris Paul. He couldn't get the ball up the court.
Man, that was rough.
Like he cannot compete at that kind of physical level when he starts breaking down later in the year. And without any one of those guys, they don't have the depth to make up for it. And if I was betting, I'd bet that at least one of those guys is not going to be there. Devin Booker's also been injured this year, and he's also been, the last 2 or 3 years, he's been getting injured a lot. He's young, so you got to hope that he's going to be okay. But counting on health for them is really dangerous, especially without the depth to really make up for it. That's why I've got them as good as they are at 4.
Yeah, and you take a look at the record, they're 31-27, 5th in the West, but they made the biggest splash of the trade deadline. Kevin Durant, who was, one of the top players in the league, one of the top players, the best players we've ever seen, get traded from the Nets to the Suns for Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Jay Crowder, and 5 first-round picks. So the Suns had to give up their depth and a lot of their future, but they're betting on this happening right now because we're at the end of Chris Paul's career. Devin Booker is, when he's playing really well. And now you've got one of the best players of all time in Kevin Durant. So, it's hard to say that when they're healthy, which is a big if they're healthy, they're the most talented team in the league, you'd think.
I think that would be right. But I just don't, Chris Paul, even what is relatively healthy for him now, he's just not what he used to be. And I think it's, that's going to be tough. They did, as you mentioned, they lost a lot of depth. Losing Malik Bridges and Cam Johnson, those are 2 great 3-and-D players. Jay Crowder as well, even though they weren't playing him. And the Nets, they may have really, an interesting question with the Nets and everything that happened with them. Are they actually still better off because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving came to New Jersey? Or would they have been better off
Brooklyn.
Not? Brooklyn. Sorry.
What do you say?
Or would they have been or would Brooklyn have been better off if they just hadn't come? And that Brooklyn team's not bad now. They're not a contender or anything, but those picks could be very valuable that they got. 4 first-rounders and a pick swap. So they basically control the Suns draft for the second half of the decade. And that's a decade where Kevin Durant is going to be about 40. Chris Paul is going to be long gone. And they don't have a lot of capital to make up for it. They're really they need to win now in the next couple of years to make it worthwhile. And the Nets may be sitting on a real treasure trove of picks.
Listen, if you've got Cam Thomas who's shooting 40 points every game like he did 3 straight games, became the youngest player in NBA history to score 40 points in 3 straight games.
He looks legit. He looks like a legitimate scorer. Maybe not. Maybe teams will figure it out once they really get enough tape on him. But, he looks like he can go get a bucket. And the Nets got tons of nice, rangy 3-and-D players out of this, like Malik Bridges. They got Dorian Finney-Smith from the Mavericks. Lots of good players they picked up with all those draft picks. It's kind of sucks what happened when you have those 3 players and James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant, and they won one playoff series the whole time. That's pretty painful. But at the end of the day, they're not in the worst shape right now. They're definitely, I'd rather be in the Nets position than like the Wizards position.
Duh.
Well, okay. Yeah. But the Nets are 5th right now. Do you think that they're going to drop by the end of the year?
I do, but they could be so good defensively. Malik Bridges is essentially as good as a wing defender gets in the NBA. I don't know if anyone's actually better than him. And that kid they have playing center, Nick Claxton, has immediately become one of the very best defensive centers in the league.
Leads the league in blocks.
Yeah, and he's a good defender. He's not just, chasing after blocks and letting, plays happen. He's a really good defender. Dorian Finney-Smith is one of the better 3-and-D defenders out there. They're just kind of loaded defensively. I could see them being the really tough out night by night that kind of sticks around. I just don't see them going anywhere in the playoffs.
All right, so Suns were number 4. Let's go to number 3.
So at 3, I've got the Nuggets. I think that the next 3 teams, they're the ones that they're in a bit of a separate group than what we've talked about. So
they're the ones with the 3 best records.
Yeah. And they're teams that there's no real reason to think they won't be generally healthy when, come playoff time. And they've just got everything clicking and everything looking good. With the Nuggets in particular, they don't do much in the trade deadline. They picked up Thomas Bryant from the Lakers for a guy named Devon Reed and 2 second-rounders, and then they lost Bones Highland. But as we talked about, Bones Highland had to go anyways. Thomas Bryant's an interesting. He was a backup center in LA, and he was upset because he wasn't getting enough playing time because Anthony Davis there. So then he gets traded to the Nuggets, and he's behind Jokic, who may be the only player in the league that's better than Anthony Davis at center.
That was dumb.
So, not much is going to happen for him there. But the Nuggets if you watch them play, they are a well-tuned offensive machine. I don't think any defense can really handle it. Jokic is just such an amazing distributor. Given his height advantage, I think you could argue that he's the best passer in the NBA's had. He's definitely among the best that I've ever seen. He has such an advantage from his perspective, up at nearly 7 feet, distributing the ball with such incredible touch, and they're just so deep. The pickups that they made in the offseason, like Contavious Caldwell-Pope and Bruce Brown, who are just really good defensive-minded players who can still shoot the three really well, are really paying off. Contavious Caldwell-Pope, he may not be anymore, but he was leading the league in the three-point percentage. And that's on a team where you've got Jamal Murray, who is really starting to look like himself and look like the problem that he was developing into before he got hurt in the bubble. And Michael Porter Jr. just loaded on that team with offensive talent. And, if they go up against a team like Phoenix, which I think people are assuming is a good matchup against Denver, I don't know about that because, Aaron Gordon for the Nuggets has had a kind of a quietly like all-star level year. I mean, just a awesome defensive player with, a good, solid, efficient offensive game, but just a real defensive stopper with good size to him. Just the kind of guy that, no one can even really slow down Durant, but can make Durant work for it on offense. So maybe he doesn't have as much energy on defense. Gordon be great with that. Contavious Caldwell-Pope, again, a great defender, would be great to stick on somebody like Devin Booker. So, even though they're an offensive-minded team, I think they have defensive solutions to at least make the other team less efficient than they'll be. And I think that can go a long way, which is why I would pick them to go in the West as of right now.
Bold move there.
Okay. I mean, you've got Jokic, who's the two-time reigning MVP, who's having another MVP season. He's averaging a triple-double, basically, right now. And how about this fact? In the last 24 games that Jokic has scored a triple-double, the Nuggets have won, which is tied with Magic Johnson and the Lakers for the longest streak in NBA history. So next time he scores a triple-double, if they win, that's a new NBA record.
Nice fact.
Yeah. I mean, and earlier this year, he had the 40-point triple-double, which, nobody's done that since Wilt Chamberlain. He's an absolutely incredible player. I mean, he's shooting 63% from the field right now. So, I mean, he scores at volume hyper efficiently. Like nobody shoots that kind of percentage at that kind of volume. And then, you put in his passing, all the different targets that he has, the defensive abilities that they do have, the focus that they seem to have right now as everybody's kind of coming back. I think the last 2 years were really hard on them because of injuries, and I think they're really motivated to do it this year. So, I think the Nuggets are going to go from the West would be my pick, although it's going to be really tough, and we're just going to have to see about how healthy the Suns are.
Yep, 39-18, 4.5 games ahead of the second place Grizzlies at the top of the West. So we got 2 teams left. I think we all know who those 2 teams are residing in the Eastern Conference, but let's see which one Hillbilly put in second place.
Well, I don't think this is going to surprise you that I have the Celtics in second place,
Okay.
despite the fact that they are barely in first place right now.
Barely.
I think they're up by 1 game, if I'm not mistaken, or a game and a half. But, they have basically been tied for first place now with the Bucks for a while. I mean, those teams seem to be somewhat separating themselves from the Sixers and the Cavs, although the Cavs are climbing up fast right now. But the Celtics, they've had some problems since they lost Marcus Smart. Now they've got Jaylen Brown out for a little bit. They're still chugging along, though. They're such a well-rounded, deep team now, which they were not last year. I think we mentioned this last time, but if we, go back to last year with what we were saying in the playoffs, they ran out of gas and we saw it coming. We predicted that was going to happen because of the minutes that they were playing. And this year they fixed that problem. I think they must listen to your podcast because
Zander's facts.
They went out and they fixed it and they got a lot of really good backup players like Malcolm Brogdon And at the trade deadline, they didn't get a big splash, but Mike Muscala is the kind of guy that, can come in. He's a big, strong defensive player, or big, strong, big guy that can shoot from three very well, especially when he's a little streaky, but when he's hot, he can really be dangerous out there. It's just another guy that they can give minutes to now, though, to keep Horford good and rested up for the playoffs. It's a team that already knows exactly what they're doing, and it's really hard to make an argument that anybody's clearly better or more likely to win the championship than them right now.
Well, Hillbilly's going to try and make that argument. But little couple facts for the Celtics here. They're the only team that is in the top 5 in both offensive and defensive rating in the league. They're 3rd in offensive, 4th in defensive. And they have the best average points per game differential in the league, 6.2. They're averaging almost 118 points per game. And, I mean, we are talking about a team that represented the East in the NBA Finals last year with Jason Tatum, who has 8 40-point games this season, which is 3rd most for the Celtics with Paul Pierce, because Larry Bird has the other 2 seasons with more, with 9 of those. And then, beyond Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, you've got a guy like Derek White, who became the first player in NBA history last Friday when the Celtics beat the Hornets, who had 10 assists, 8 3-pointers, and 3 blocks in a game. How about that?
Too many facts.
Yeah, and he's a great defensive player. He's just part of that depth that they have. They're just an excellent, well-rounded team. And like I said, they know exactly what they're doing. They're kind of like the Nuggets. Like the focus is there. They know what they're doing. They're ready to ratchet down come playoff time. They're going to be really, really tough.
So the Celtics are 41-16 at the moment as of Monday night when we're recording this podcast. The only team in the league who is over 700 on winning percentage. Before we get to your number one team, because I'm pretty sure that your number one team is not this team. You mentioned Cleveland, who is 4th. They're 5 games back of the Celtics. They are the top team in the league defensively, according to the metrics. They are 1st in fewest points allowed per game. And Donovan Mitchell scored 70 points earlier this year. He's just the 7th player ever to record a 70-point game.
These are facts.
What are the Cavs doing right this year?
I think they're doing it right because I think this year wasn't going to be their year. I think it was really unlikely that it was going to break that way for them. So they're letting their guys play. They're getting better every year or every day. Evan Mobley is starting to show some offensive signs he's already a defensive nightmare, but he's starting to show offensive signs that's really getting scary. They've got 4 excellent players, but that's the problem, is that they've got 4 excellent players and nothing else. At the trade deadline, they didn't address their biggest need, which was a wing. They just need a big wing stopper, somebody that can play that perimeter defense out there, on some of the bigger wings that are out there. And they didn't get it. And they don't have a lot of depth, behind those guys on the bench. No playoff experience for most of those players, or in the case of Donovan Mitchell being on Utah, bad playoff experience. It'd be really unlikely to see a team like that break through this year, I think.
All right, so Celtics were number 2, not Cleveland. How about Hillbilly's number 1 team? Number 1 contender in the NBA. Is he going to surprise us? Oh my gosh.
I don't think so.
Tell me.
I doubt it. It's the Bucks. But the reason that I picked the Bucks, and I said that about the Celtics, it's really hard to pick anybody over them. But the way things look right now, the Bucks are the hottest team in the NBA. They've won 10 in a row. Since Chris Middleton came back the second time, because remember, he was out at the beginning of this year. It was this injury that we thought was only going to we thought he might come back in the playoffs last year. There was an outside chance. It turns out there was no chance of that ever happening. The injury lingered well into this year. Then he came back. He had a setback, gets pushed back out. Now they're bringing him back. He's starting to look more like himself. They're being really careful with his minutes. Drew Holiday's having a good year. They are deeper than they've been in a couple of years. I liked their pickup at the trade deadline where they got Jay Crowder. who is a good, rugged defender, which is the kind of guy that they're going to need in the playoffs. He's a streaky shooter, but when he's hot, he can really help. They're just a very well-rounded team. They have been just about as good as the Celtics all year long. And we are witnessing them round into form. There's every reason in the world to think that the Bucks are going to be significantly better by the playoffs than they are right now, the team that's winning 10 in a row. And, that's the reason that I would put them over the Celtics, because I think that they've got a little bit more headroom to actually get even better than they are right now, where they're essentially tied. But, with as good as the Celtics are, I wouldn't be surprised if the Celtics just have another gear they can put it into in the playoffs. I like the way that things are going with the Bucks right now. They look like they're really rounding into form. Defensively, it's impossible to go against the Bucks when you've got a point of attack, like the tip of the spear defender, like Drew Holiday, who just like you can see Drew Holiday terrifies Marcus Smart. You saw that in the playoffs last year, where multiple times Marcus Smart visibly looked nervous when he would look up and see Holiday coming after him.
Evil.
I mean, Holiday really embarrassed them in that series a lot. And then you've got it backed up with maybe the best interior defense other than maybe Cleveland in the league. Giannis is, I think people maybe forget just how good he is defensively. I mean, he is a legitimate defensive MVP candidate, as is the guy standing next to him, Brook Lopez. They've got everything going together. And, the jury is still a little bit out on Jason Tatum. He hasn't quite gotten a team all the way there yet. Hasn't shown like that level of like control over the team, getting them to focus like we talked about earlier with other teams. Giannis just has champion written all over that guy. I mean, I know obviously I'm, the biggest Giannis homer there is, but I mean, you can't deny nobody works harder than him. I mean, he is busting it every single second he is out there on the court. And that when you're very best player who can do whatever he wants and not get in trouble, when he busts it like that every single second out there, there's just no excuse why everyone else isn't doing that. And I think that's why you see so much buy-in on that team, so much focus on there. Hopefully, like I said, Jay Crowder will be healthy and ready to go, because I think he can be a helpful addition. I don't see at full power that I think they're trending towards anybody that's going to be able to beat them in a 7-game series.
Yeah, Giannis is third in points per game in the league, first in rebounds, and second in fast break points. And as you said, they got Jay Crowder. When you talk about, recent playoff experience, he was with the Suns when they played the Bucks in the NBA Finals. He was with the Heat, I believe, in the bubble when they went to the
He
finals.
had a very good bubble. That's Jay Crowder when he's streaky shooting. He couldn't miss in the bubble. But then other times it evades him.
So they got him. They gave up George Hill, who, George Hill's traded every deadline day, so that was no surprise. Serge Ibaka, Jordan Nwora, and 5 second-round picks. I don't know what was going on with the second-round picks. Like, I know it almost seemed like picks were being traded.
It almost seemed like for a second. Well, one team traded 5 second-round picks.
That's a lot of numbers.
No, but yeah, there were a bunch of pick stackings in the second round. This deadline was kind of weird. Yeah,
it was almost like everybody had got an extra second rounder to play with or something. But I think for the teams that spent them, I think they're spent well. I mean, Jay Crowder, I know 3 second rounders is a lot of second rounders, but they are just that, second rounders. And Jay Crowder is the kind of guy that can help you in the playoffs.
All right, so Hillbilly's top contender is the Milwaukee Bucks. But before we go, I mean, there's been a ton of stuff going on around the league last week. Couple of the headlines that I think we should mention before we go. We've got the Mavericks, 2 teams in the West, really, we should talk about. The Mavericks, who are sitting in 4th, who traded for the other half of that big duo that was in Brooklyn. Didn't turn out too well. Kyrie Irving, they gave up a first-round pick, a couple second-rounders, Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, but they got Kyrie Irving to pair along with Luka Doncic, who is first in points per game right now. But you didn't even have them in your top 8, Hillbilly.
No, well, they don't have any. Their defense was horrible this year. I mean, especially relative to the defensive teams that the Mavericks had put out the previous 2 years, where they were just rock solid. This year, they were not playing well defensively. And so, what do? They trade away their best defensive player, Dorian Finney-Smith, for a guy who never wants to play defense in Kyrie Irving. Yeah, so their defense is going to be even worse. And offensively, yeah, I mean, Kyrie and Luka, on opposite sides, it's really difficult for a defense, you would think, to know what in the world to do with that. I mean, somebody is going to be getting the ball with a head of steam at some point during every offensive set if they're doing anything right. Counting on Kyrie is insanity.
That's a big fact.
This is just a rental. Kyrie's a free agent after this year. They gave up a first and a second, or 2 seconds, along with those players. Spencer Dinwiddie being another one that was, having an important year for them this year, for a rental on Kyrie. And with the kind of defense they're going to have, I mean, nobody wins the finals with the defense that's in the, 25th or worse, which is what they're almost certainly going to be. You don't win finals like that. So it just, to me, seemed like a desperation move. Like maybe they know something we don't know about Luka getting itchy about wanting to get out of there.
Huh.
Because that is one hell of a gamble on Kyrie Irving. And I don't know why in the world anybody would trust that guy.
It was, you never know when something else is going to pop up. I mean, we thought we were good with him when, all the vaccine requirements ended, and then, this other thing pops up, and apparently he's been active on social media again, so, okay.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly, threw the match to burn the bridge on the way out of Brooklyn. Because
that too.
I mean, he just, and it's the silliest thing in the world, because everybody watching it is like, Kyrie, do you really think that we're going to believe that Brooklyn was it wasn't you, I mean, Cleveland, Boston, Brooklyn, it's just the same thing everywhere he goes. I guess the only saving grace is it's a contract year. He had been playing really well when he was focused this year. Maybe he knows that to get paid next year and to get another big contract, he needs to be on his best behavior. But I just don't think anything like that has stopped him before.
If you say so.
We'll see. But a team, I mean, we got to talk about him, hillbilly, the Lakers. I know they're 13th in the West, but we just had LeBron James become the NBA's all-time leading scorer, passing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That was pretty cool. And it's really kind of like a new look Lakers surrounding LeBron and Anthony Davis now, because Russell Westbrook is gone. That did not work out too well. Patrick Beverley, Thomas Bryant are gone. In comes D'Angelo Russell, who's coming back to LA, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, Mo Bamba, Devon Reed. It's different, but obviously they're 13th, so, you can only really go up at this point.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, when you look at what they did, they, basically picking up, as we talked about, Rui Hachimura, D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, getting off Westbrook's contract. Kendrick Nunn wasn't playing much. Thomas Bryant wasn't happy there and wasn't really that big of a deal for them. And then they lose a first rounder. They definitely brought in some good players, or better players. Like Jared Vanderbilt, I like a lot. He's an effort guy that's going to be able to probably give him some good defensive minutes, spell Anthony Davis with a little more quality minutes than they were. Malik Beasley can be a volume scorer, and he was just not afraid to put it up. Rui Hachimura is, I think he's probably, wasn't that excited about him for them. I mean, Rui's always been like a project. He's this very tantalizing athletic specimen type, 6'8", 6'9", really quick, really strong, but just doesn't seem to be very good at basketball, which, as it turns out in the playoffs, becomes really important.
Are you sure?
So I just don't know that he's really going to help him. D'Angelo Russell's the one that I guess they're hoping. And it's funny because I haven't heard anyone mention, D'Angelo Russell used to play on the Lakers.
He was the second pick when he was drafted to LA.
Right. Yeah. And he left under very poor circumstances. I don't know if people remember it, but Nick Young also used to play for the Lakers at that time.
Swaggy P.
And D'Angelo Russell secretly videotaped Young admitting to cheating on his fiance and then distributed it.
Whoops.
they had to trade him after that. They just hated him so much. And now he goes to Golden State. Golden State couldn't get rid of him fast enough and turned him into Andrew Wiggins, which was great by Golden State to do. Mm-hmm. And then he goes to Minnesota. And now Minnesota's had it with him too. Despite the fact that he's having his best shooting year this year, they're still just like, nope, just go. It's just difficult to see somebody who's obviously got that kind of locker room repellent gravity to him that he's really going to help this team right the ship. And, LeBron James is injured right now. Anthony Davis, as I've said before, every time you see him fall to the ground, you wonder if he's going to get up. It looks like a car crash every time. It's just difficult to see him making it through the year. So with all that said, I don't think it made them contenders. I don't think they have a legitimate shot of climbing out the hole. I mean, remember when LeBron had his big game where, he set the, all-time points mark, they lost.
Yikes!
To Oklahoma City, that's a really, really big loss for the Lakers. That's the team that's right above them. That's one of the teams. I think it's 3 teams or 4 teams that they have to get over. And Oklahoma City is one of those. Like, they can't count on Golden State coming down. They need to count on teams like, Oklahoma City getting over them. And they lost at home when LeBron is breaking the scoring record. You would think they'd be motivated to let him win that game. The Lakers would be, and they just couldn't really bring it. I'd be surprised if they really made it past the first round in the playoffs.
Well, do you think they're going to make the play-in? I mean,
No.
they're 2 games out, but they lost to the Thunder, who are currently in the play-in right now.
And, it'll be interesting with the Thunder. And, the Jazz, obviously, they traded away a lot of players. They're over the Lakers, so they could be tanking. We talked about that, previously, that there might be something that Danny Ainge might do here is blow them up twice in the same season. And he did to a limited extent. So now God knows how many draft picks Jazz have now. It's like everybody in the league has some first round picks. So, you could see them maybe dropping, but they still have some good quality players on the Jazz. So I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I have to think that they did make some roster improvements at the trade deadline. They are deeper than they were. They're just better than they were. Not to an extent where it's going to make a huge difference, I don't think. But yeah, if I was betting, I would think they'd be in the play-in, but they're going to be at like 10th or 9th. And that means they have to win 2 play-in games in a row. Mm-hmm. And then that's for the privilege of playing like the Nuggets or the Suns or whoever's in first place.
Yeah. I mean, Reggie Miller, they were doing a TNT game with the Lakers. He had the line, anytime Anthony Davis grimaces, it's 3 weeks.
I want to see anytime AD grimaces, it's 3 weeks. What?
Yeah. I mean, but you've seen him play. Like, you know what I'm talking about. He doesn't fall like most people do. I mean, it's just this, like he just crashes to the ground. And I feel bad for the guy because it must suck to be like that. Well, I mean, I feel bad for him. I mean, he's obviously living an incredibly, blessed life. But I mean, to be that talented, though, but he's so frustrated with your body that like it just breaks down on you so much. But, he is just also one of those guys that, as you're trying to predict what's going to happen in the playoffs, can you count on him? Can you count on Chris Paul? Can you count on Joel Embiid? Can you count on James Harden? I don't know that you really can. They just don't usually bring it towards the end of the year. And I think Anthony Davis is just there. I mean, he had his great year in the bubble. So at least he had that.
All right, Hillbilly, as we wrap up the podcast, final thoughts on what we're going to see in the home stretch here. I mean, we're talking about a league where scoring is dominant. I mean, you've got 3 times this season that there have been 5 games in a single day where both teams in the game scored over 120 points. That 3 times that's happened this season, and that never happened before in league history.
Cool facts, bro.
So what you got? Final thoughts on what we're going to see in these last 2 months ramp up to the postseason?
I think that for the second year now, the NBA is really wide open. I thought it was pretty open last year as well. But this year, those 8 teams, I wouldn't be surprised if any of them won. Clippers that would actually at this point maybe kind of surprise me. But the rest of them, I can see all of them doing that. And I just don't think that's the case in most years. It is wide open. And that's why I think we had that trade deadline, which, I think most people that have looked at it, it's probably the biggest trade deadline we have. Durant's definitely the biggest trade deadline trade that the NBA's had. And, everything else with Kyrie and everybody else that moved, it was just a huge trade deadline because it's so wide open. All these teams really do think that they can do it. And there is so much talent in this league now. We've talked about this before when we talked about the MVP race last time, how much talent there is in this league, how much young talent. I think it is really illustrated well by, you have Kevin Durant and LeBron James. LeBron James, now it's the flavor of the month, I guess, to call him, among the greatest ever or whatever. He's in the top 3, whatever he is. Kevin Durant's in the top 10. And Kevin Durant, before he got injured, was having maybe the best year of his career. I mean, his numbers were just out of sight. He was playing so well. So, you've got a guy that's like a top 10 all-time player in his absolute prime. And I don't know that he is even in the top 3 in the league right now. That's how strong the league is. That you can have players still playing well like LeBron James that are all-timers, but you can make an argument for Jokic. You can make an argument for Embiid. You can make an argument for Antetokounmpo that they are also just as good. I mean, does that mean that we have or Luka Doncic, that we have 3 or 4 top 10 players playing right now? And not necessarily, obviously, but I think it's just illustrates just how good the talent is right now. And it's really great to watch it, especially as it just gets better and better.
All right, well, there you go. All-Star Weekend is this weekend. We're 2 months to the playoffs. NBA season is heating up. It's time to watch some basketball, y'all. All right, and to recap and basically update the NBA season, it's our Zander's Facts NBA senior analyst, Hillbilly. Hillbilly, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Zander's Facts.
Oh, yeah. Thanks again to Hillbilly for coming on the podcast. And thank you all for listening to this week's edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. That's all the facts I've got for episode 94 of the Zander's Facts podcast. And remember that if you like the Zander's Facts podcast, if you liked all the facts that were on this week's edition, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode 94, rate and review the podcast, go on all our socials, check us out, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Zander's Facts. That is Zander with a Z, and most importantly, of course, remember to tell all your friends. We like to call it around here, spread the facts. Zander's Facts podcast. Tell all your friends about the podcast, about Zander's Weekend Facts, our newsletter, about Zander's Facts on YouTube, because all our new episodes get posted to YouTube, including this one. You should go check it out. Check out the Zander's Facts link tree. It's got all the Zander's Facts links that you need, including for the Zander's Facts website, which includes the Zander's Facts shop, zandersfacts.com. There are so many facts. Oh my gosh. But that is episode 94 of the podcast. Next week, we got a brand new episode, also episode 95. And next week, we're going to talk about something that we really haven't talked about before on the podcast. Now, I know we've talked about soccer before on the podcast, but we really haven't talked about the domestic league of soccer in the United States. And by that, I'm talking about, yes, Major League Soccer, MLS. Their season starts at the end of the month.
Seriously?
And things, the way you watch MLS on TV is going to be a little bit different this year. It's kind of a new era for MLS, for Major League Soccer in this country, and hopefully one that continues the growth of the game. We're going to talk about all of that next week here on the Zander's Facts podcast, episode 95, so make sure to tune in. But that is it. That is a wrap on episode 94 of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening, and the Zander's Facts podcast rolls on with episode 95 next week.
Spitting the truth.